On March 2nd of 1791, an 87-year-old man lay dying. But he'd had a pretty productive week. Just a few days before, he had received a call from a man who wanted some counsel. He hardly knew the man, but he made the 16-mile journey anyway. And after an hour and a half of private counsel, he was informed that the villagers had gathered and wanted to hear him preach. So, tired as he was, John Wesley stood and preached what would be the last of tens of thousands of sermons. The next day he received word that a friend of his was discouraged in his work, and so he sat and wrote what would be the last of his many, many letters. This letter was written to William Wilberforce to encourage him to remain strong in the fight against slavery in the British Parliament. Well, a couple days later was John Wesley's last day on earth, March 2nd. And it is said that he didn't have much to leave behind by way of an inheritance except one well-worn coat, 2 silver teaspoons, and 140,000 Methodists. You know, John Wesley's legacy and inheritance that he left behind may not have been material, but it certainly was valuable. Proverbs 13:22 says this, "A good man leaves behind an inheritance for his children's children." John Wesley certainly did that. He didn't have any biological children, but he did have thousands of spiritual children, and what he left behind for them was an inheritance of a faithful example that could be followed. You know, that verse in Proverbs makes me think of my own grandfather. My grandfather didn't have a lot of inheritance to leave behind. He was a farmer, pastored a small church, delivered some bottled gas on the side until he lost his eyesight and could no longer work. And on the last Christmas that he had with us, I remember him standing and saying how he regretted that he didn't have an inheritance to leave to us 6 grandchildren, but that he did want to give us something for Christmas. And he reached into his bag and pulled out, for each of us grandchildren, 1 Hershey's chocolate bar. You know, my grandfather, when he died a few months after that, didn't have anything to leave us materially. But you know, I've got hanging on my wall 1 marriage certificate where he took my grandmother's hand in marriage and remained faithful to 1 woman for a lifetime. I'd call that a pretty good inheritance. And I'm proud of the legacy that my grandfather left behind, even though there wasn't much money. You know, all of us are building an inheritance for our children and grandchildren. Sure, we would like to leave them something materially, but here's something more important. Are we going to leave behind a life of faithfulness and a legacy that can be followed and built upon? You know, we can't leave behind what we haven't lived. So if you want to leave a good inheritance for your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, today's the day you must begin being the kind of person that you want them to follow. Remember, a good person leaves behind a good inheritance. So, today, like John Wesley left behind a good inheritance, my grandfather did too. So for you, as you go about this day, live the kind of life that you want to be remembered for. Because trust me, you're making history today, and people really will remember. Just like for me, whenever I eat some chocolate, I usually think of Grandpa. Now go out and make some history today.